Jane was a Yank.
Jane was Jack.
Was Jane British or American?
American. Jane was Yank. She was American.
American. Jane was a Yank. Jane was an American. Was she an Australian?
No, she was not an Australian. Jane was Yank. She was an American.
No,
Jane.
she wasn't an Australian. Jane was a Yank.
Yank.
She was an American.
Yank.
Who was a Yank?
Jane was Yank. She was an American.
Jane was a Yank. She was an American. Jane was sitting in the restaurant alone.
Jane was sitting in the restaurant alone.
Was Jane sitting with a friend?
No, she wasn't. She was sitting in the restaurant alone.
No, she wasn't. Jane was sitting in a restaurant alone. Who was Jane sitting with?
Jane was sitting with no one. Jane was sitting in the
She
restaurant
was sitting with
alone.
no one. Jane was sitting in the restaurant alone. Was Jane sitting in a hotel?
No, Jane wasn't sitting in the hotel. Jane was sitting in the restaurant.
No, Jane was sitting in the restaurant.
Restaurant.
She had just arrived in Vietnam. She
had
walked
just
to a
arrived in
restaurant.
Vietnam. She walked to restaurant.
Had she lived in Vietnam for 6 months?
No, she had lived in Vietnam for 6 months.
No,
She
Jane hadn't
has
lived in
not
Vietnam
arrived
for
in
6
Vietnam.
months. She had just arrived in Vietnam. Did Jane walk to a restaurant?
Yes, Jane walked to a restaurant.
Yes, Jane walked to a restaurant. She walked to a restaurant. Did Jane take a taxi to a museum?
No, Jane didn't take a taxi to a museum. Jane walked to a
No,
restaurant.
Jane didn't take a taxi to a museum. She walked to a restaurant. She knew no one in Vietnam and was sitting by herself.
She knew no one in Vietnam. And
Did Jane
has no
have many friends in Vietnam?
No,
No.
She-
Jane didn't have many
Jane
friends in
didn't
Vietnam.
have
She
many-
knew no one in Vietnam.
Vietnam.
How many people did Jane know in Vietnam?
None. She knew
None.
no one
She
in
knew
Vietnam.
no one in Vietnam. Why was Jane sitting alone?
She is sitting alone
She was sitting
because
alone
she knew
because
no
she knew
one
no
in
one
Vietnam.
in Vietnam. Jane was feeling a little lonely because she knew no one and had no friends in Vietnam. Why was Jane feeling lonely?
Jane was feeling lonely because she knew no one and has no friends
Jane was
in
feeling
Vietnam.
lonely because she knew no one and had no friends in Vietnam. Was Jane feeling lonely?
Yes, Jane was feeling lonely.
Yes, she was feeling lonely. Jane was feeling lonely. Was Jane feeling lonely because she had no job?
No, Jane was feeling lonely because she has no
No.
job.
Jane was feeling lonely because she knew no one and had no friends
has no
in
friends
Vietnam.
in Vietnam.
Did Jane have many friends in Vietnam?
No, she didn't have many
No. She didn't have many friends in Vietnam.
friends in
She
Vietnam.
knew no
She
one and
knew
had
no
no
one
friends in
and
Vietnam.
has no friends in Vietnam. Friends.
Quan walked in, ordered his food, and sat at the table next to Jane's.
Quan walked in, ordered his food and sat at the table next to
Did
Jane.
Quan sit outside the restaurant at a table?
No, Quang sat to a table
No, he
next to
sat at the
Jane.
table next to Jane's. Did Quan walk out of the restaurant?
No, Quang didn't go out of the restaurant. Quang wasn't
No, he didn't walk out of the restaurant. He walked in, ordered
ordering
his
his
food,
food
and sat at the
at the
table
table
next to Jane's. Where did Quan sit in the restaurant?
at the table next to Jane. Quang sat at the table next to Jane.
At the table next to Jane. He sat at the table next to Jane's. He began a conversation with Jane.
He began conversation with Jane.
Who began a conversation with Jane?
Quang began a conversation with Jane.
Quan. Quan started a conversation with Jane.
Quang started conversation with Jane.
Did he finish a conversation with Jane?
Yes,
No. Quan didn't finish his conversation with Jane. He began a conversation with Jane. What did Quan begin with Jane?
a conversation.
A conversation.
Quang
Quan began a
asked Jane-
conversation with
Quang
Jane.
began conversation with Jane.
Quan asked Jane questions to get to know her better.
Quang asked Jane questions to get to know her better.
Did Quan ask Jane questions to hire her for a job?
No, Quang didn't ask Jane questions to hire her
No.
for a job.
Quan didn't ask
Quan
Jane
asked
questions to
Jane
hire her for a
questions
job. Quan asked Jane questions to get to know her
to
better.
get to know her better.
Why did Quan ask Jane questions?
To get to know her better. Quang asked Jane questions to get to know her better.
Quan asked Jane questions to get to know her
Question.
better. Did Quan tell Jane a story to amuse Jane?
No, Quang didn't.
No. Quan didn't tell Jane a story to amuse Jane. Quan asked Jane questions to get to know her better. Jane told Quan her story and why she was in Vietnam.
Jane told Quang her story and why she
Did
was
Jane
Vietnam.
refuse to talk to Quan?
No, Jane didn't refuse to talk to Quang. Jane told Quang
No,
her story
Jane
and why
didn't
she
refuse
was
to
in
talk to
Vietnam.
Quan. Jane told Quan her story and why she was in Vietnam. What did Jane tell Quan?
Her story and why she was in Vietnam. Jane told
Her
Quang
story
her
and
story
why
and
she was
why
in
she
Vietnam.
was in Vietnam.
Jane told Quan her story and why she was in Vietnam. Did Jane sing songs to Quan?
No, Jane didn't sing song to Quang. Jane told Quang her story and
No,
why she was
Jane
in
didn't
Vietnam.
sing songs to Quan. Jane told Quan her story and why she was in Vietnam.